Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Asher Marketing Podcast. This podcast is brought to you by Asher Agency, a full-service marketing agency with offices in Indiana, West Virginia, and Washington, D.C. For nearly 50 years, Asher has helped their clients tell their stories, reach customers and prospects, and stand out from the crowd. To learn more about how we can help your company, visit asheragency.com or contact us at hello@asheragency.com. My guest is Jill Brown. Jill, how you doing?
Good. How are you, Anthony?
I'm good. Thank you for joining me for a very special episode of the Asher Marketing Podcast. Normally, we talk about our guests' career path and where they work and what they work on, but you've already done that.
I have.
So today we're going to talk about media planning in election season, which some of our listeners may not even realize is complicated and controversial, but we're going to talk about all that. Before we dive into that, I'm going to let our listeners/viewers in on two secrets. One is that Jill Brown has more notes than any guest we've ever had. There are at least 4, maybe 5 pieces of paper in front of her, so she's very well prepared for this conversation. The other one, and this is a plug for our YouTube channel, because you won't see this if you are just listening, but if you watch this episode, you might notice that Jill Brown turned her sweater inside out or backwards.
Backwards.
And why did you do that, Jill?
Because while brushing my teeth, I got toothpaste on the front of my sweater.
So now it's on the back of your sweater.
It is.
All right.
So you can't see it.
Okay, so even our YouTube viewers wouldn't be able to see it.
No.
But you would see the look on Jill's face when I brought that up, and that is worth the price of admission. Okay, so let's talk about media during an election season. We've got an election coming up, which everybody probably knows. What should advertisers be thinking about as they plan media for the fall, especially as we get to October?
It's going to be a crazy time.
Now, why is that?
Because our political candidates are going to spend at least 30% more in this election than the 2020 election. So remember how you saw back to back to back to back to back political? It's going to be worse.
Okay. So can it get worse? I mean, I remember during the primary season, it seemed like every TV ad was a political ad. So it's going to be that and maybe even more?
Higher, they're going to pay higher rates, but yes. And because of all the additional channels, all the digital channels, you're going to get hit 360.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about how this affects different types of media differently. TV is different because political can preempt anything else. Is that true? And if so, can you explain what that means?
So I'm going to back up a little bit.
Okay.
TV and radio are governed by the FCC.
Okay.
And the FCC says for the November election, there's a 60-day window where all political candidates or issue money has fair and equitable right to inventory. Okay. So that makes them last in and last out. So they can go by last minute, pay high rates, and preempt non-political advertisers.
So fair and equitable among the candidates, but not fair and equitable to other advertisers.
No. So, long-term advertisers get the short end of this stick.
Yep. So in theory, it could be that all that you hear is political advertising on TV and radio because that preempts everything else.
Yep.
Okay. How does this affect, if at all, outdoor?
Outdoor, since there's only one billboard at a specific location, if a candidate comes in and buys it, it's gone.
Okay.
And if they're doing their jobs correctly, they should be buying early.
Yep.
So that just eliminates inventory, but it's not regulated by the FCC.
And digital billboards means there's just more in inventory.
Correct.
So,
Correct.
Okay.
The two that are most affected are going to be TV, radio.
Yep.
And predominantly for radio, it's going to be the news talk formats that skew a little older.
Okay. What about digital? Is digital affected by this at all?
Other than they're going to get a ton more money? No, they're not governed. However, certain platforms, such as TikTok, does not take political advertising. So other Meta, Google, they're going to have a heyday.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about what's happening behind the scenes in your world, because we're recording this in early September.
Yep.
What are you talking to clients about? What have you been talking to clients about in terms of how they might prepare for all this?
So if a client has a weekend sale or a very time sensitive
Yeah.
promotion, we talk to them about one, either possibly moving
Yep.
that promotion,
Yeah.
or we look at completely different channels where we might have had an even split, traditional media and digital. We're going to roll heavier towards the digital side, and possibly cable. So we look at different alternatives to help assure that their media is going to run.
Yeah.
I mean, in TV, even paying 20, 30%, they may not air.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm going to go back to when we were talking about different tactics. What about like streaming video?
Yep.
How is that affected by all this?
Yep, they're going to see a huge increase. Connected TV is absolutely going to be a viable option.
Yep.
That tends to be more expensive than
Yeah.
traditional TV. So again, you're going to see that 20 or 30% increase in spending that's going to be needed to do what you need to do.
Yeah. So costs are going up in a number of different ways
Absolutely.
because there's limited inventory, because you have to shift to other media, because you may not have budgeted for creating the assets that you now may need
Yep.
because you're using a different medium.
Yep.
So there's not a lot of good news in this for advertisers outside of the political world.
Nope.
Okay. Once again,
And TV and radio stations who are going to garner
True,
the additional
true.
ad revenue.
yeah, and the politicians stick it to us once again. Okay. In terms of the cost ramifications of this, beyond paying more, what can advertisers do to manage costs, to mitigate costs? And as part of that, how far ahead should you plan for political seasons?
We've been planning for political all year.
Yeah.
Knowing when we do our annual plans, we build things around the political windows for this very reason.
Yeah. Well, and to be clear, some of the clients I work with, you work with every client that buys media. I work with a few, and many cases we just avoid October. In some
Absolutely.
cases, you can't do that.
Absolutely.
But where possible, the further ahead you plan, the more options you're going to have, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
It's a difficult puzzle to start with. It gets even more difficult during the political windows. And it's a 60-day mandatory window from the FCC. And if we can avoid it, we avoid it.
Yeah.
Quite honestly. Or we might look at TV stations have natural 10-second spots built into their inventory.
Yep.
We might look at that, or 15s, or other alternatives.
News sponsorships as an
Tie
example,
into
maybe.
packages. Look at sports packages. So if you tie in a package, then you're kind of guaranteed that inventory.
Okay. So obviously we're focused on November and the 2024 election, which is a presidential election. It's a gubernatorial election.
in Indiana.
Yeah, in Indiana. So what about if someone's listening to this and they're saying, okay, I've already planned for 2024, how much of an issue is this in election seasons where it's not a presidential election or a gubernatorial election?
It really depends on the state and what they have.
Yeah.
Local elections.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about that, because even in 2024, how things look in Ohio is going to be different than how they look in Indiana.
Pennsylvania is a key state for the presidential election. There's
Yeah.
19 electoral votes up for grabs, and that's even right now. We in Indiana probably won't see presidential.
Because it's not as contested.
It's not a contested
Yeah.
state.
Yeah.
But our governor race is going to be, it's heating up now. They're already starting to run heavier TV schedules and are on talk radio. So it's already affecting us.
So let me ask what might be a naive question. So during a primary, there's more candidates trying to get airtime. Is it worse in the primary season because more people are competing for that finite TV and radio space, or because the volume goes up heading into November, is it worse as you head to the general election?
We had a bad May.
Bad in terms of low inventory?
Yeah, a lot of demand on inventory
Got it.
for that April, May,
Uh-huh.
for that very reason, because we had a lot of candidates vying for those 2 seats to go into November. They don't. Each individual candidate doesn't tend to raise as much money, but collectively, it's a good chunk.
Yep.
Now the parties are backing the candidates, so there's deeper pockets.
Yeah, and how does, again, a question that this might be a naive question, but advertising that isn't from a candidate but that is from a special interest group, how's that play into all this?
The stations take the money under the political
Yeah.
caveats.
So same rules apply.
For the most part, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And if it's a group for or against a political candidate,
Which usually they are in
they
today's environment.
still
Yeah.
are considered political
Okay.
and
All right.
fall under those headers.
Okay. What haven't we talked about that your team is thinking about planning for or advising clients about?
So even though the election is early in November,
Mm-hmm.
the ramifications are felt through the end of the year.
Oh,
So
okay, let's talk
if,
about that.
if I have a client that I say, let's avoid that time period, but we can run our special, our deal
Mm.
in November, you're going to have residual from spots that were preempted from non-political clients.
Explain what you mean by residual for those who may not know what that
Okay,
means.
so if I place a schedule, political comes in,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
buys up all the airtime. I get preempted. My spot gets blown out of it. Okay, so I'm going to try and get it back in the same type of inventory after the election.
Okay.
So there's going to be pressure for 2, 3, 4 weeks after the election for things that didn't run. If I plan a promotion during that period, I've already got my time in, and people are going to be paying higher rates to buy that inventory. You've got Thanksgiving,
Yep.
which goes into the largest retail season of
Yep.
the year.
Yeah, Black Friday and all those other days right around the holidays.
So
yeah.
your retail automatically is putting pressure on that time frame.
Yep.
So September, October, November, and December are going to be tough.
Okay. All right. So let's sum up. So number one is you need to think about being flexible in October and November and maybe even after the election. You need to be prepared for higher rates.
Yes.
You need to plan your promotions accordingly so you're not heavily dependent upon TV and radio at a time when that not be available.
Correct.
What am I missing? What are some of the key things?
And you have to be open to other opportunities, whether it's out of home, digital, social, which should be part of your plan anyways.
Yeah, well, and things like direct mail, things like amping up, public relations. Maybe some of that gets lost in the news cycle, but
Yep.
it's a comparatively viable opportunity when some of your go-to media aren't available.
And I would be careful with direct mail prior to the election. Because you're getting tons of direct mail from the political candidates.
This is why you are in charge of media and I'm not in charge of anything. Okay.
Yeah, lots. You think about what's coming into your home or you're catching on your digital devices. How am I going to fit with this message in that environment?
Yeah.
And it is especially cluttered during the political windows.
So do you think, and this is a subjective question, do you think a lot of consumers just kind of tune out? And what does that mean for an advertiser who's not political, for someone who's not in the race, so to speak?
Yes. First off, yes, I think people tune out because you see the same message over and over for the last 6 weeks.
Yeah, I'll admit I got fatigue in May, and I said I'm just not going to turn on the TV for a couple of weeks because I'm tired of hearing all the negative.
And in addition, so if you do decide to try and do something during this period, you have to be ready to spend more money on higher rates and just higher budgets because you're going to need a higher frequency to break through.
Okay.
And you better have a compelling message.
Yeah, for sure.
To be able to break through.
Yep.
Doing the same old isn't going to be a smart move, in my opinion.
Yeah, which is good advice even in a non-political
True.
window. Yeah.
That is true.
Okay, most important question. If somebody says, I don't know what to do with any of this. I need expert help. What's the best way for them to get a hold of you or your team?
Oh, you can either call the front desk, old school,
260-424-3373.
or email me at Jill, Jill, B as in boy, at AsherAgency.com.
All right.
We are always here to help.
All right. Well, really good advice. Really appreciate you doing this. You may now turn your sweater right side front, and hopefully the toothpaste stain has dried by this point.
I hope so.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jill.
Thanks, Anthony.
And thanks for everyone who took the opportunity to listen to this special edition of the Asher Marketing Podcast. We'll be back next time with another great guest, and we hope you'll join us then.